Okay, let's see. Supposedly live now. Hi, and again, welcome to a new episode of Karim Talks about economics. I actually have a surprise for you guys today. So you're getting a surprise 2 days in a row now, which I hope that you very much like. So I'm going to start with the introduction as per usual. Karim Talks about economics is a podcast made by me where I talk about economics, where I give you a small insight into how economists think, right? And also the content is going to be a little bit about economics, but that is of course not limiting, as economics is very broad. It can be about the macro level, it can be international, it can be about the politics, but it can also be, as we saw yesterday, about the behavior of individual. That's a very new branch of economics. uh, Behavior, uh, behavioral economics. Yes. I hope it's not too laggy. You can see it's a little bit laggy, but hopefully the voice is not at least laggy. That's the most important thing. So three things that characterize this podcast for those of you that have not seen it before. It is spontaneous, it's informative, and it's open-minded. It's spontaneous in the sense that um, I have um, I have prepared the minimal amount of things, um, and that allows us to go some avenues that we would not otherwise have gone through. It's not a presentation, but more of a discussion and just a coffee talk. One could look at it from that perspective. Now it's informative in the sense that of course it's going to be a little bit funny, but the goal is to offer you some new information in fields that you might not have thought about before. And it's also informative for me as I get an insight into new different aspects of different people's worldview. And it's also informative for the people that I talk to because they are asked some questions that they would not otherwise have been asked. And lastly, it's open-minded in the sense that I don't have a specific agenda, and I'm willing to ask any question, and there is nothing that is really limiting, and thereby it's also very inclusive, and and it's not that we're trying to avoid to talk about anything, right? So it's very transparent as well. As per usual, I start out with news and then a follow up from last time. Then usually some reading, but today, just as yesterday, it's going to be a little bit uh, different. We're going to have a guest, and then we're gonna conclude the things that we've talked about. And at last, if any questions should arise, there is a Q&A session. So let's get into it. And I don't know how well this would work with the news section, as I have to share my screen, and it seems like it's very laggy. Let's try to do it anyway. So now you should be able to see my screen, and I start out with the corona numbers as per usual, and those are of course the corona numbers from yesterday. We see that we are now at, well, currently we're at 11,800 and around 50,000, which is not that large of an increase from yesterday. Actually, it's a very good uh, increase in the sense that it is not that much as we've seen in the previous days. I think we're even below the 200,000 line, which is quite positive. Death rate seems also not to have increased that much. It's at around 540,000, and yeah, the critical ill are still at 1% of the total active cases. So that's good that we don't have any spikes there. With respect to the specific countries and how um, how many they have, how many new cases they have received, we see that the United States of America is again at 50,000. And again, that relates to maybe the argument that I've made before, in that they test more on every, yeah, okay, let's say it, the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Fridays than the weekend, right? So that might be related to that, but they are back at 50,000. Brazil is now again, second day in a row in the 20,000s. India is still in the 20,000s, and maintains its third position. Now, what is positive to see here is that the United States of America has only had around 400 deaths, which, if I recall correctly, this is a very low number for the U.S. It's been at six. Well, it started out at the thousands, and then it even went up to 2,000, and now, and for multiple days it stayed at 600, but now it's down at exactly 378, right? Where Brazil is at 650, 56, right? So even though Brazil has a lower new cases, maybe the cases are more severe down there. Even India is above the USA in fatalities. So that's positive for the US. And we can see here that they are now moving towards the 40,000, excuse me, the 40 million total tests, which is quite significant, as that is around double of any other nation, right? So that's good. Now, if we go to the news, yes, this is a headline that is all around the world at the moment, and in most news agencies, that Bolsonaro has got, or has tested positive for COVID-19, right? So he has the coronavirus. So the guy who did not believe in the disease now have the disease. Now it's a little bit unclear um, if if it's a severe case of COVID or not. So that's of course something that we will be following as time goes by. Again, highlighting my point, the CNN also has this as their main headline. Um, However, they also say things about the United States not being as strong as always as it has been, and talking about that maybe U.S. Students would have to return back to the United States, and are maybe in the future, in the next semester, not allowed to stay in the foreign countries, which might make some sense, as some would be new exchange students and those would not be allowed to move abroad. For instance, in Europe, we have halted the travel from the United States of America, and it would not surprise me if other countries did the exact same thing. Um, on the screen here, you can see the bubbles, which show where this is happening, and you see the biggest bubble in China, which makes perfect sense, maybe also politically, in that they are, mm, well, they are just doing the same thing that Trump did to them, right, at the beginning of the crisis. Moving on to, let's see if I can get it up. Yes. Yes, let's see. Yes. So this is Fox News, and of course, also as yesterday, they are not talking about the Corona crisis, but rather talking about China and talking about Trump's vision for 2020 and his campaign. That again goes 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 in this goes to strengthen the argument that I made yesterday about the marginalization of policy of news agencies in the U.S. Um, and maybe also the idea that these news agencies are a little bit biased towards the political party that they support. Um, yes, and finally you have the BBC. Also, the main headline is that Bolsonaro has tested positive. However, we see down here in the bottom left corner something with Syria, the Idlib battle, which is actually something that we've all forgotten about. We've forgotten about that there is still some geopolitical conflicts in the Middle East. Currently, you have that well, as you can see, still a recovery in Syria, a war in Yemen. Lebanon has started to demonstrate. Libya, a conflict is on the uprise. And there are new demonstrations in Ethiopia, which is actually something that I have not, I did not really cover, but that is apparently a big thing that is happening in Ethiopia currently, right? And it was because of the death of a poet or someone who was against the government, which is of course a discussion about whether that country is democratic or not. Um, and when I say that, it's important to note that the president of Ethiopia received the Nobel Peace Prize last year, right? So that really brings to question: can we really trust those leaders just because they do one thing at the beginning of their political career, right? Once they stay in power, how will they behave? Right, and that relates to political economy a lot, and into the research of the incumbent. And yeah, but let's not talk a lot about that. I think this last news down here at the bottom, uh, that Melbourne has now locked down, um, is a good transition. Is a good news to take into the transition of the into the interview that I have with actually someone who's studying medicine. His name is, as you can see now on the screen, his name is Muhab Baisam Abdallah. As you will notice, our names are a little bit the same, and we might also look kind of the same, which hints to the fact that we are brothers. He is actually my brother and also my flatmate. So we have many discussions, and I have persuaded him to come and sit with us today and maybe tell us a little bit about what all of this COVID-19 is. And I think a good starting point would be to ask him, well, Mohab, hi, firstly.
Hi, thank
Yeah,
you very much for inviting me.
yes. I thought it would be a good idea if you could tell us about what you are currently doing. So I saw some beautiful pictures of you wearing some medical clothes. What is that about?
So, right now I'm in my summer holiday and I'm actually having a job uh, at a city here in Denmark called Karim. It's Novo, the Novo Group, the Novo Nordisk, who have planned all this job work, and it's about testing all the Novo Group employees
Mm,
for antibodies for COVID-19, the
okay,
SARS-CoV-2 antibodies, the coronavirus antibodies,
okay.
as many people will call them. And as you know, Novo Novo is many places around Denmark and many cities. So I'm placed here in Kalundborg and working testing people, taking blood samples, and just being nice for the Novo employees, helping them around the, the site where we are.
Yeah, sounds very interesting. And is there a lot of people participating in this program?
Actually, and unfortunately, we expected a lot more people to participate in this. Uh, so we have approximately 250 people per day
Yeah,
who are testing, but in the employees are much more. So we expected to have 900 employees coming
yeah.
to test per day. Yeah.
Oh, okay. But do you think that's related to people not wanting to participate, or they are afraid of participating, or what?
Maybe it. I think all the process have been too fast
Ah,
because
yeah,
it's a collaboration between the Novo Nordisk and the bench of the hospital in Copenhagen. It's a collaboration between them, and they have began the screening very early because the screening is going to be uh, uh, this like it's going to be over 3 rounds, and this first round, this is our first round, and it has been too fast, uh,
yeah,
like to recruit people to the screening. But we hopefully will get much more amount of people when we reach the 6 months and 12 months intervals,
yeah.
because people will know more about it maybe, and
Hmm.
and be willing to participate then.
Yeah, but it's interesting that you say that the process is too fast. Is this not normal in the medical industry?
Well, it's a research. It's research. As a, they want to make they want to publish these results
Mm.
at one point, and so it's a research. And yeah, they had to start early because the coronavirus situation
Mm.
are already here. So they sent mail out to the Novo employees, and 2 weeks after the screening, like that, we have to take blood samples. So
Oh,
only 2 weeks. Yeah,
yeah. Okay, I see.
but it's also good so they don't forget about it. But I don't think everybody like took it too seriously.
Okay,
Yeah, or
okay,
weren't interested for any reason.
okay. Well, will this go towards? Well, you say this is towards research. Do
Mm.
you know if Novo is working on some treatment for the COVID?
Really, I'm not sure. Uh, I think like uh, I think Novo are more developing tests, like
Mm.
new types of tests, and more tests with higher sensitivity and specificity
Yeah,
to ensure that we get the right people, uh, identify the right sick people. But I'm sure that they also are working with others, and maybe all by themselves, uh, to find a treatment. But the problem is that it is a virus, and actually there is no treatment. You have to find a vaccine, and
oh,
I really
okay.
don't know if Novo makes vaccine, but maybe they are participating in research groups,
Mm.
like funding research groups who are working on vaccines here in Denmark. Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure they are. Yeah.
okay. It's it's quite interesting actually. And usually, well, the only thing I know is from the only knowledge that I have about this field is from Anthony Fauci, and he says that it will take a long time, or at least years, right? He said that in early 2020 that it would take 1 to 2 years until we actually can have a vaccine. How do you see that process going? Is that realistic, or would it even take more time?
It's very hard to determine when we're gonna find a really good vaccine. You have to first develop a vaccine and then test it on animals and then people, and then ensure that it's not have any side effects,
Mm. Yeah.
and it's efficient enough. So yeah, I think 1 or 2 years by the pace that you're working at right now will be a good estimate.
Okay.
But not like we heard in the beginning, like 4 months or
Yeah.
the end of the year. That's like I don't believe that it's too early.
Yeah.
Maybe in fall next year, who knows, or in spring next year. But that's gonna be really fast, and it's gonna if that happens, it's gonna be the fastest ever developed vaccine in the world.
Even okay. Okay, nice. Yeah, that,
Yeah, yeah.
of course, me as an outsider, I would love that. Just so all of this gets out of the way. Um,
Uh-huh.
however, you said something that's quite interesting here, right? Or how I interpreted what you said um, is quite interesting. You said at the beginning we thought maybe 4 months, and that was of course unrealistic. Um, however, when this pandemic came, um, maybe there was a lot of unrational things that were said, and maybe even actions that were uh, unrational. And I think one of one of the things that is really here to discuss with you, maybe as a medical, I wouldn't say you're an expert yet, but you're at least moving towards that direction, is maybe the lockdown. Do you think that was a good decision by the Danish government?
Mm-hmm.
And
So
if it was a bad decision that other people didn't do it, for instance? Yeah.
so first of all, about the vaccine, uh, like and the information that has been said about the infection and the virus.
Mm.
Really, there has been a lot of fake news out there in the beginning and also now. And but I think we are slowly getting uh, to to learn the right informations as the time goes on. But really, a lot of fake news have been not published, but have been in the news, and
Mm.
people have believed it. And unfortunately, we have to listen to experts about something like a pandemic.
Yeah.
So we didn't, like, we as medical students or experts, no experts did expect that it's gonna take 4 months or 5 months. It's just fake news, and maybe it was just something they hoped, but they really knew that it's gonna take a longer time uh, because the process takes a lot of time, and also for not just vaccines but also medications, like just normal medications takes also too many steps in the development. So because it has to be effective, it has to be secure, and it has to be like available for everyone, and a good price,
Yeah.
and a fair price. Yeah. And about the lockdown, that was your second question. About the lockdown, really, here in Denmark, it has been a very, I would say, efficient lockdown.
Mm.
Like we haven't suffered from Corona a lot, and that's probably because of the lockdown. So I would say the lockdown has been really great for the country as concern of medical, like uh, at medical concerns. But at the economics, it has been not good. It has been bad for the economics, and that's not for Denmark, but for all countries who have locked down.
Mm.
But it is essential, and it is important to to make interventions to ensure that people don't get out together and don't get close to each other, which happens at places as universities and restaurants and public gardens and that everything like that. Yeah. So the thing I liked about the lockdown most is the restriction they made for groups. You don't have to be more than 2 or 5 or 10 together.
Okay.
I think that's the best thing, because by doing that you also automatically close universities because we sit like 200 people in a hall. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, I don't know how much you followed the United States, the lockdown in the United States, but do you have any thoughts about that? Was that efficient? Or was the things that were put in place efficient? And is it just the people, or was the lockdown in itself less efficient?
I really didn't follow the American lockdown, but I know that that America like suffered from coronavirus and are still suffering, especially in New York. They suffered a lot, and many other cities. And
Yeah.
it very quickly it spread all around USA in a couple of days. But I really think that they uh, they they did it late. They did the lockdown really late, so the interventions were made a bit late, too late, and also like just the people. The people are different. So the people in Denmark are they take care more. I think they are more precautious. They get like a form of fear from the government when they are told about the coronavirus, and they are seeing pictures from Italy, for example.
Yeah.
They just get
Yeah.
a type of fear from coronavirus automatically, and they take care a lot more of the American people have shown.
Yeah. I definitely
so
agree with you.
it has to do about the people also, not
Yeah.
only about the lockdown. So.
Yeah. Okay, so a common denominator for Denmark and the United States was that it was the politicians that made the decision and not the health experts. Uh, was that a bad decision not to leave it up to the experts and let them and let us just follow their um, maybe direction and their recommendation? Well, we followed their recommendations, but their directions.
I really, I really think that the politicians like. I think the politicians are hearing the experts about something like that. I really hope they are doing that, and I really uh, I appreciate they are doing that, and I like you should in a situation like this listen to experts, and I also think they are doing that.
Yeah.
And they did that in Denmark. The National Serum Institute have been involved in this process very much.
Yeah. Yeah. That is true. That is true. And how I see it personally, that all the politicians listen to the health experts. That makes sense when we are in a pandemic. Um, However, at the end of the day, it is the politicians that that will make the final decision. Should we lock down? Should we not lock down? What kind of restriction are we going to make? Are we gonna close down? What kind of things are we gonna close down? And when we open up, what kind of things are we going to open up? And for me, it's maybe the because we have a social democratic elected prime minister, and the government is also that social democratic. That really helped in the sense that the health of the people was prioritized um, over the economy. Now, of course, the economy was not totally. removed out of the picture. However, the focus was more about the people. While in the US, and maybe also the UK, the economy was prioritized. Why we saw the late lockdown. Yeah, I think if we had led it to the health experts in the US, we might have had a position where they locked down the country a little bit faster. Um, and in Denmark, the opposite could have happened if we left it to the Serum Institute, for instance. Um, yeah, that's how I
Yeah,
view it.
it is a compromise between many things. It's a compromise between the the economic side and the healthcare side, and many more, like the public side also. And politicians hear from many experts from these expertises, and they have to take a decision, and it's a compromise. It's difficult. They are not having an easy time in pandemics like this. They have to take care of a country as a whole.
Yeah, it is really a big thing, and to take and they also have to be responsible for it at the end of
They
the
have
day,
to.
right? Uh, Therefore, they can only do things that they trust in, because they will be criticized, whether it being on the health side or the economic side. But that's a good transition to a different question. Um, do you think there is a relationship between the wealth of an individual and the health of the individual?
Can I have this question again?
Do you think there is a relationship between the wealth of the individual and the health of the individual?
Okay, so that's like question out of the COVID-19.
Yeah, it's not specific to COVID, no.
Okay, so yeah, I think there is a relation. Yeah, I think there is a relation. You can see it in two ways. I think you can see it as the one leading to the other, or the other leading to the one.
Okay.
So if you have good health, like you like you're one taking care of yourself. So you train, you like sports, you eat well, you have a healthy lifestyle. You you really get more of you get more like, what do you say? You really like living, like you live a lot better when you
Yeah.
have a healthy lifestyle. And by living a lot better, you also are doing maybe better at work. You're doing better with your wife, doing
Yeah.
better with your kids. You're doing better with your home and something like that, and so on. And then you will have better wealth if you think about it, because you're gonna work. You're gonna have more. You're gonna be more enthusiastic
Yeah.
working. You're gonna be interested in what you're doing. So that's how health can lead to better wealth.
Yeah.
And if also you're rich, uh, like being rich is not directly being healthy, and being healthy is not directly, it's not like 100% leading to better wealth.
Yeah.
So I think if you have a lot of money, if you have like wealth, if you have wealth, not money, but like other things also. So if you have wealth, how can that lead to better health?
Yeah.
Well, you have to, like, I don't see health as in this sense. I see health as something you have before you're getting sick. So if you get sick and you have a lot of wealth, you can get treated, yeah.
Okay.
So and then you gain your normal health again. But if you want to be healthy and living a healthy lifestyle, wealth can help you doing that. But you have to have your own personal drive. You have to have your own personal drive, because you can have so much money and it's just you're just not using it for your own prosperity. And your health is a very important part of your wealth, I think. Also, it's
Okay.
part of your prosperity. It's part of your uh, part of your wealth. It's a very important part,
Yeah.
because it's something you're investing in.
Yeah. So you see it as
You can invest in your health.
Yeah.
Because like yeah, it's cheap, but it takes. But if you see money, or if you see time as money, going out for a run doesn't cost you anything. It just takes time. You see, so you have to invest, and if you see time as money, it's gonna be investing money in it, because you're investing time for nothing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it is an investment, and eating healthy is also investment. It can be expensive for somebody. It can be daunting, like unappetizing for some people. But yeah, you just gotta know that know what you're doing, and know that it's good for you, and really just make it nice, like being around people who are also motivated enough to invest in their health. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that that's a great motivation for people. That's at least an advice from a medical expert. Um, that I hope a lot of a lot of the people that watch this and don't watch this do take into consideration and at least look at it as an investment, um, right? In the old times, rich people were portrayed as fat people because they had a lot of money to eat. But now it's kind of the opposite, right? Fat people are the poor people, and those who are um, thin and have a better muscular shape, those are the rich people. Um, so yeah, I think you're definitely right in viewing it as an investment. And good investors are not only good with their, as you said, money, but also with their time, as that is at least a commodity that is non-tradable, right? Your time is yours, and you cannot. Well, you could give it away to someone, but you cannot physically give it away. You can give the labor of this time to other people. So
Yes,
it's not tradable in that sense. Well, not perfectly tradable at least. Um, okay, but if we look at it in black and white, like when you were in the hospital, right? Were Of course it's a little bit difficult here in Denmark at least to make a distinction between those who have money and those who don't. But did you see more people that were maybe in the middle lower class than people being in the upper upper class or the upper middle class?
Really, I can't answer that question well enough,
Yeah.
because I haven't seen too many patients yet, and I really don't know their
Yeah.
their social class. And here in Denmark, it's nice because you don't get the social class. You don't get the information about the social class, about people. Like the healthcare is free, and everybody is equal on that point.
Yeah.
So we treat everybody with the same opportunities, the same way. But yeah, I that said, I think that a lot of the older people at the hospitals are people who are living in like the middle class. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they are the middle class.
Okay.
But that's maybe because the most of the people are middle class.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just a funny statement, I think.
Okay, this was also something that I wanted to talk with you about, but I think you introduced it yourself by saying free healthcare, right? So in Denmark, um, we pay a lot of taxes in order to have free healthcare, and a lot of other people, a lot of other countries, excuse me, have the exact same model, right? However, in other countries, and I think um, this is a big discussion at the moment, or was at least before the COVID, maybe also now, um, it is the discussion between the private versus the public healthcare. Uh, what's
Mm-hmm.
your? I'm just gonna leave it very open here and say, what's your view on that, if you have any?
Okay, about the private and public.
Yeah. So you can say the Nordic countries versus the US model.
Okay, okay. So I just want to add for the last question something that's also very important because social classes are different in in the hospitals, but I don't think it has to do only with with their wealth, or it doesn't have to do anything with their wealth, or maybe that they are disproportionately distributed, like they are much more middle class people. But I also think that the way that people are educated have to do with with with, with being in the hospitals, because really educated people learn more about, like they know much more about how things work in general, and they take much more care about of their body.
Mm.
And when they get injured, or when they get something that feels funny around in the body, uh, they really search for doctor. And searching for doctor in early is much better than just leaving the pain uh, for a while, and then when it's really hurting, when you really can't go, or when you really can't bear yourself or lift your arm, you go to the doctor. So maybe have to do with that rich people search the doctor a lot more, and therefore getting diagnosed early stages
Okay.
of any diseases.
Yeah.
Probably it has to do something with that. And for your other question about the public and private, I really can't answer that question. Um,
Okay.
so sorry, because I only have worked at public hospitals in Denmark.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, like I think private hospitals. If you have a country with only private hospitals, it's going to be difficult for the people with not a lot of money. It is going to be a lot difficult, and they're not going to be treated as well in any way if they don't have the money. And that's very sad. And in some hospitals, they don't treat you if you don't get if they don't. If I've heard about they don't treat you if they don't they know that you have the money, so you have to give them
Mm.
money
In
in
advance.
advance. And that's
Yeah.
maybe for the problem. But that's how it is in some countries.
Yeah. And that is of course not at least here in Denmark with the Danish view that we have that all people should be treated equally, is
Yes.
is not okay for us at least. As you said, it's a good thing, I suppose, that you as a doctor, when you go into a patient, you don't know the social class of this individual, as to not
Mm-hmm.
treat him differently than others. And what is also interesting here is that you said we don't differentiate between the people regardless of their I suppose status, um,
Mm-hmm.
which goes to show that you're willing to and I see it as an investment, right? The treatment is an investment in that individual. You put that
Yeah.
investment regardless of the status of
Mm-hmm.
that individual.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And also again, uh, people with more money maybe are investing more in their in their health. than people who don't have a lot of money, and also
Yeah.
their lifestyle are probably a lot more healthier also,
Yeah.
and thereby getting less diseases and less presented in hospitals. Yeah.
Yeah. You also said something that you couldn't talk about the private hospitals because
Mm.
you've only worked in public hospitals. However, I'd like to ask you, maybe with your fantasy. Um, I'm not going to ask you about the U.S. now, but mostly here in Denmark. So we live in a socialistic country where healthcare is for free. You call the ambulance, it comes and gets you, then it sends you to the hospital. That's the very normal thing. However, in Denmark there also exists private hospitals. What do you think that private hospitals here in Denmark offer?
Like, I think private hospitals offer plastic surgeries.
Mm-hmm.
They offer uh, like they offer what the public offers, but just with money. I think
So it's faster.
it's yeah, and you can maybe get what you want. Uh, you can get what you ask for. In contrast to the public, where it's it's uh, it's it's the system that controls
Yeah.
how you will be treated.
Okay. So you get what you need, kind of
Yeah,
thing.
if you really know what you need, uh, if you really know what you need and you have a lot of money, then yeah, then it's maybe better just to go to private hospital.
Yeah. Okay. But is that much more expensive? I don't know if you know this, but is it much
No,
more
no, I
expensive?
don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Um, I know that you have to wake up early tomorrow, so I have two things
Yeah.
to end with. The, one of those are going to be an open statement, so you can say whatever you want if you have a final statement. But before that, I'd like to ask you about the medical oath because I remember we talked about that, but it would be nice for you to summarize it if you recall it. Like, what does it really entail to take a medical oath?
So yeah, I really can't recall everything in it because it's not taken seriously right now.
Okay.
Something we do like we write our signature and assign at the end of the medical journey at the university. Not journey, but at the end of the university when we finish there. And but we have read it and like it's it contains that something like you're gonna you promise that you will do your best and your uttermost when treating people regardless of race, color,
Mm,
and class, like social class, um, or anything on their body. Like so, regardless of who that patient is and which country he or she comes from.
mm.
That's something that I can recall that it contains. That you're gonna do your best for the patient and also for the country as a whole.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Mm,
So you're not just using up resources for the country. So you also have to take care of firstly the patient and your co-workers. I think that's
okay. Yeah.
that's something I can recall, but I can't recall the rest. Seriously.
Yeah, and because I remember that was one of the things that they had a small discussion about, at least at the very beginning, um, during the Corona crisis here in Denmark, that we had to uplift that law uh, because we might reach a situation where the doctors had to prioritize, and that prioritization could have led to direct death of people. So yeah, now thank you for that insight. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it puts things
Mm-hmm.
a little bit in perspective, um, for
I
me
hope
and the
so.
viewers who are not medical experts. Um,
I hope so.
Thank you very much, and I'll now, yeah, I'll just leave the floor to you and ask you if you have any final remarks.
Really, I hope everything everything will be all right, and I hope that you will have a nice time doing this podcast
Thank you.
in the future. Also, it's a very nice idea, and I'm really glad that I participated. And I hope that people out there and you have learned a little uh, from me, and that they are
Definitely.
just gonna invest in their health to prevent diseases
Yeah,
and just learning more about the body and how to improve your health is very important. And just advise people and let them reach to a doctor and to talk about their health have if they are concerned or anything. So I don't have anything else than that. Uh,
yeah. Maybe you can end with the medical advice that you usually give to me, right? So people tell you to eat apples, eat green, and go run and things like that, which you've also said today. But you have one additional one, which is to remember to sleep, right?
uh-huh.
That's a good one.
Yeah, yeah. So so don't be sleep deprived. Yeah,
Yeah,
stay up for one night if you have to, then sleep, but sleep a lot. Sleep like enough for what's enough for you. It's really different between people. Yeah. But yeah, just if you're thinking wrong and you're just busy and people are looking at you like a crazy one, just sleep. And also if you have it, it really helps. Sleep is it's a magical thing. It's really is. I like
yeah. I know you like it. You love it, man.
it. Yeah.
Okay. Uh, Mohab, thank you very much, and take care of yourself in Colombo. And thanks for your service,
Thank you.
man. Thanks for your service. Really, you're doing a fantastic thing, um, and you will in the future also make wonders. I'm
Thank you very much.
wholeheartedly, definitely sure about
You too. I hope so.
it. You hope so. Okay, so I'm certain about you, but okay then.
No,
Okay,
no,
man.
I have high hopes for you also.
Okay, man. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
So take care of yourself, man.
Thanks for your time again, and take
You're
care.
welcome. You're welcome. No
Okay,
problem.
see you.
Bye bye. Have a nice evening, everyone.
Bye from me and all the others. Yes, so that was Mohab, as you could hear, with his final remarks about investing in your health and learning about your body as well, right? And that is also why I'm doing this podcast. If we're not open-minded, and we're not willing to talk to other people that are a little bit different than ourselves, and to ask them questions, we will never be able to receive new information. And I think I at least learned a lot from this interview, um, with this great student of the medical sciences. Mm, as per usual, I will give you a small break. I'll go to the bathroom and give you a small break, as to digest the information that you have received, and I will be back shortly. Yes, I am back. I'm going to turn the screen such that you can see me a little bit better. Here we go. Yes. So yeah, I think yeah. I enjoyed this interview a lot, as I also did yesterday with Silvio, and I did the day before with Omar. We always learn new things, and we get a different worldview from different individuals because we've all been through different paths in life. So if we have to take us, yeah. So let's do as we did yesterday to summarize what we have really gone through today, and we started out by discussing what he's actually doing currently, and he's doing a summer internship at the Novo Group, where he is participating in a scientific, um, well, in a scientific research experiment where they are testing people at the research at Novo Group um, for antibody tests um, in order to see if they've had the corona previously, and they are also testing their family members. And sadly, the thing is, so they are taking blood and testing that. They only have around 250 participants a day, where they expected 900. So that's a significant nearly a fourth of what they expected, a low number, definitely. He attributed that to the fact that um, the research program has been put in place too fast. Maybe people have not been given time to react. He also sees that that might have even had a positive effect. So maybe we could have expected less people. So right, so it's positive in the sense that it's still fresh in people's minds, and they will actually go and do take their blood samples tested. However, he thinks that as this takes on in the group themselves, right, and people start to talk to you one another, they will participate in the following period. So they are not only doing it now, but they're also doing it 6 months into the future and 1 year into the future. So it seems as if this is a big project that um, will lead to maybe many researches into COVID-19 and its effects on the population, at least the Danish population. He attributed that maybe people are not taking this seriously. However, this is COVID-19, and I'm quite certain that people are taking it seriously. Maybe it's the test that they are not taking seriously. However, this might even show that when it's something else, people would take it even less seriously, right? So this is also something that we have a problem with, that people, yes, may be concerned about this, but when we ask them to do an active thing, they might not do it. It's a huge problem, of course. Yeah, he mentioned that Novo Nordisk is maybe not directly participating in creating a vaccine, but more trying to make tests with a higher specificity and a sensitivity. It means that it's more accurate, right? So when you're positive, you're actually positive, and when you're negative, you're actually negative. Is this a good thing that they are focusing on that and not the vaccine? Well, in light of the information that it will maybe take 2 to 3 years at best to get a vaccine, it seems logical to take that step. The first, because once you've developed the vaccine, you also have to give it to all people, and you will have some difficulties giving it to all people, as some people might say, "Hey, I just don't want it." Uh, so maybe that is already something they have thought through. Of course, it also yields high profits, right? Because now you're going to create two products: the testing and the vaccine, instead of only the vaccine, right? Which might be yeah, might work to increase the profitability of this specific company. When we talked about this vaccine, he said that there was a lot of fake news that came out at the beginning. However, as researchers are doing more and more um, and getting results, the truth is coming out. So this means that maybe some people have been opportunistic with this crisis, which is not something that is new to us. It usually happens that people are opportunistic when they see an opportunity that they can use, especially the news agencies, and that of course directly relates to the politics behind it. However, it shouldn't, in my opinion. I miss uh, news agencies that are quite objective and don't take a political stand or don't give their own personal opinion on things. It would be nice just to get this is what happened, this is what happened, and this is what happened, rather than to make it sound like something. But regardless, that's not what is important here. He said that the lockdown in Denmark was efficient, and most efficiently was the restriction of groups. So the size of the people that could, excuse me, that could meet up together. He said that it's a good thing to limit social interaction in uh, uh, these pandemic times, right? And we've also seen that that has yielded positive results. Um, Even in Sweden, I got a notification on my phone that said that the COVID-19 cases in Sweden has decreased, and they attribute that to the social distancing. So definitely, the social distancing seems as the most productive measure to combat this pandemic. Mm, so yeah. And when we talked about what the US has done and the UK, I tried to hint that they might have prioritized the economy. Um, However, he said that maybe they just acted slow. So maybe it's just that the political process is more complicated in those countries, and more people need to agree on the exact same thing before something could happen. He also hinted to the people being a little bit different in the sense that they are not as fearful as here in Denmark. When we see pictures, he said this quote per quote, when we saw pictures of what was happening in Italy, we got very frightened, and we started, and end quote, and then rephrasing, we started to really act in a way that harmonized with what the experts were telling us about the social distancing. However, we know that the city in New York, they have a New York mentality, and New York in the USA, they have a different mentality, and people in the US in general are less fearful than people in Europe. They have a different mentality, and that is something that I've talked about multiple times here at the podcast. That it is the people's behavior that also dictates how politics is going to work in that specific country. Now, it's not only with specific with the politics, but apparently also with the laws and how people behave, right? So in the U.S., they prioritize the social justice movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, to that of social distancing, right? I think we've all seen the pictures in the U.S. I think in April about all these demonstrations, and in June, it lasted for a couple of months here in the middle, but now it's about fading away, which in my opinion is a good thing when the cases has reached 50,000 again, new cases per day in the US. It's good that people are have a little bit fearful, but however, the United States mentality is built upon not being fearful and being the strongest, and being able to go against the wind, as per se. Then we said that then we agreed upon the fact that politicians should listen to experts, and he believed that politicians do listen to experts, uh, but it is of course a difficult thing to listen to experts, right? Because what kind of experts are you going to listen to? and at the end of the day you will be criticized. So it's about making the right move, right, and being able to stand behind that move, and being able to argue for that move, and justify it, uh, hopefully when all of this is done. Then we had a rather lengthy discussion about wealth and health, if there was a correlation here. He did say that the correlation exists, right? However, the causality is more ambiguous. And when I mean what I mean by that is that it's not always that more wealth leads to better health, or that better health leads to more wealth. One helps the other, but the other also helps um, the prior one. So he said that um, uh, more wealthy people have more money to buy better, uh, uh, more healthy snacks, better food. They have time, right? Because they can hire other people to do work for them. More time to invest in their bodies. And that's a point that I will move back to. That more wealthy individuals um, will will maybe utilize that money for their health. Um, on the other side, we he also said that health leads to more wealth, as a more healthy individual will have more time and more strength in his or her body um, to accumulate wealth. Right? That makes perfect sense. However, he said that, and then I asked him whether one could see a difference between the wealthy and the non-wealthy in the hospitals. And he, of course, argued that that is not the case in Denmark, and that makes also again sense, as Denmark is a socialistic country where he proclaimed that there's no difference in treatment between wealthy and non-wealthy individuals, as all are treated equally, and there's no dollar sign at the report of the individual, as might exist in the US, right? If you're under a specific plan, and that plan mm, has put a cap on how much they are willing to pay for your treatment, right? I'm not sure that that exists, but I wouldn't be surprised if it did exist. He said something else, though, that is quite worth um, stopping at um, and noting. It is that while there is no significant difference between the wealthy and the non-wealthy, there is a significant difference between the educated and the not educated. One would expect that the non-educated would be more at the hospital. However, that's not the case. It's those that are educated that are more represented at the doctor's offices and in the hospital. And that is the case because they go early to the doctor, and they are more observant to abnormalities in their body and their physique, and something that should not feel as it feels. Um, while those that are less educated, they might wait a little bit more to go to the hospital, which of course leads to an overrepresentation of the educated individuals in the hospital. However, an overrepresentation of the non-educated or less educated individuals in severe cases at the hospital, right? Because when you're educated, you go to the hospital quickly, you contact the expert, as per se, and you get treated for this thing quickly. Not quickly, maybe not even fast, but in an early stage. And think of this as a tumor, for instance, right? Um, if you're looking at your body and something that feels weird, you're educated, you go to the expert, it's removed. However, if you're less educated, you think, it will go over, man. Nothing. Um, this is nothing. I can get through this. I've done it before or something like that, right? And then it gets severe, and then you fall over one day, and then the ambulance comes and takes you to the hospital. So there is a discrepancy here. Um, for However, there is a in Denmark a clear link between education and wealth. Therefore, the argument for the wealth and health in Denmark, I think, still persists. Um, and that is, of course, something that should be left to the data. However, the argument is that there is a, yeah, as Rasmus Landersø and Daniel Heckman have showed, more educated individuals are also more wealthy for the most part. And that is, of course, not only the case in Denmark but also in many other places in the world. Yes. Then we started to. Then I tried to relate that to. I started. I tried to ask him about the U.S. and of course he could not really give a precise answer of what it would be to work in a system, um, or how a system worked that provided private healthcare and not public healthcare. That's of course understandable, um, and therefore I asked him if there was a difference between the private and the public hospitals, or the public and health system in Denmark. And here he said something that's quite useful. In the private sector, you could get something as plastic surgeries. That was one of the significant things. That was the first thing that he mentioned. While in the public hospitals, uh, maybe you can't get that, right, or at least you cannot get the one that you want. So the thing that he said, right, look away from the plastic surgery part. He said that in the private hospitals, you can get what you ask for, kind of, right? Because you pay yourself, right? However, in the public hospitals, you get what you need. It's a little bit more systematic, right? And I think that is what the argument is against public healthcare in the U.S. You don't want the government to control your health, and we know that people in the U.S., for the most part, at least the Republicans, don't trust the government that much, right? And they want less government, uh, and therefore they, of course, don't want them to interfere in their health. We then talked about the medical oath because I thought that was quite significant because that was one of the first thing that was discussed in the parliament here in Denmark. That should we waiver that? Should we remove that in these times when doctors uh, might be put in a situation where they would have to make critical and maybe lethal decisions, right? To choose who to treat and who not to treat, because that was the case in Italy and in Spain. Well, I don't know about Spain, but mostly in Italy at some point, right? Which we were quite fearful for here in Denmark. Um, and he said that the medical oath was about um, a promise to treat everyone the same, regardless of race, sex, ethnicity, and social class. And I think that's quite beautiful. I think it's also something that should be maybe generalized for the entire population and not only for the medical staff. And he added that it also included parts about taking care of your co-workers and your place of work, makes sense, but also that it had to take care of the country, such that you could not overuse resources, right? You could not spend an infinite amount of money on a single individual, was the argument. So it's made to be left to the individual doctor whether I'm not gonna say that. I'm not gonna say whether to choose the money or the individual, right? But maybe some things are realistic and some things are not realistic, right? If the probability of that guy, of an individual, let's say he has severe cancer, and there is an operation that he can do to maybe remove that that thing, but it only has because it's so severe and so dangerous. The operation is so dangerous, and this is a specific case where the probability of success is 0.05%, right? Then maybe the medical staff, and the operation costs 5 million euro, yeah, let's say euros. Maybe the medical staff would just let him know that it's probably for the best, not to traumatize this individual more, um, and let him say the final goodbyes to his family, friends, and loved ones. Um, while that is, of course, also taking care of the individual, it's also kind of taking care uh, of the resources of the country. And we ended with talking about the investment in the health. We and that re- and that is what I said I will talk about later. He said, invest in your health. Investing in health is cheap. So invest in your health, because investing in your health is cheap. Um, it will give you a lot. He used a metaphor that time is money, and then he expanded on that by saying, well, if time is money and you spend your time on your health, well, then you've made a monetary investment in your health. Something along those lines. He said at least that it's a cheap investment. Go out for a run. It doesn't take a lot of time. However, the health benefits it will have on you are quite large, right? So invest in your health and learn about your body was his final remarks. And I agree with him. One, and I've also had a motivational section at podcast number, I don't recall, 5 maybe, where I said um, that a healthy brain is in a healthy body. So invest in your body, because then you will get a healthy brain, in the sense that when you have a good thing that carries your mind will think more clearly, and take care of itself. And the advice that he had for us also was to sleep, because that's also a form of investment. Um, if you can't think straight, if you're too stressed or something like that, try to sleep, clear your mind, right? So I think that's all that we have from Mohab. Um, I think I'll now go to the question from last time, and let's see how long the answer will be. In the case that it's not too long, we might read a page or two from Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations. It would be nice to read from it, as we've not read in it 2 days in a row, and the one day we read in it was not that much. So the question from last time was, why and how and when do people innovate? I.e., take um, the difficult route instead of the easy one. In other words, is it true, and when is it not true, that easy is not better, right? And that relates to a discussion with Silvio, where he said that easy is not always better, and that relates to the decision between uh, the environment and the economic growth. So the idea was that you could reach economic growth by building a lot of factories, right? And that would lead to more production. However, it would have some negative impacts, right? Um, you could also invest in research and development to create more sustainable solutions, sustainable energy production facilities, right? And that would be, to some degree, at least from his point of view, from his worldview, uh, better, more sustainable. Uh, and that's the argument, right? Easy is not always better. And the question relates to, when do you make the decision to not go the easy route? And I think quite philosophically that is when the result can be better when you don't go the easy route, right? So it's so with respect to the environment, we might still be creating these factories because the result is economic growth, which we view as better than the 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 environmental consequences, and the investment in the sustainable energy resources. The result of that may not be better than the factories, right? While they do produce some economic growth, definitely, no doubt about that, the economic growth that they produce might not be as good as had we just built the factories. So when is it? I think it is when we can look at the result of things, right? And know that it is worthwhile. That of course means that the investment has to pay off, but also a lot of other things, right? The probability of success has to be high. Well, now I'm just defining what does it mean that it will be profitable, that the investment will be profitable. Well, it is that the result is to some degree uh, guaranteed. Otherwise, it's not worthwhile. It also relates to the fact that maybe if we live in a country such as Denmark or the US or any country in the West where you have some degree of freedom and some degree of uh, uh, patent rights, proprietary rights, that gives you a competitive edge, well, then you will be willing to make the investment. If those things are not offered, there's nothing that really uh, drives you to make something that's more difficult for a result that might be morally better, but not really better, right? If you think that the government will steal it from you, then it's not really worthwhile to pursue it. And maybe that is something that is not really considered a lot. It is considered, of course, and uh, implicitly in people's minds, but maybe not explicitly. It is um, it is the idea that the security and the prop the belief and the probability of the individual to feel that he will have a better future by doing this, that he will actually do it, right? So in some countries, if you do something, the government might take it from you, right? Or make it such that you cannot sell this product, or that you can not um, use it because it does not live up to some random things, right? Or that it's a national security thing, something like that. Um, I remember a friend of mine that I worked with that told me about a trip to Japan and a Nissan factory that he visited, where an engineer had patented something that was quite innovative. I sadly don't remember what it is, but I know that my friend is an engineer, so it's in that department. And of course, it's also Nissan, so it's in that department. But he was not. But because he produced it in the Nissan factory, and while working for them, he could not use it for himself, and for them it was unprofitable, right? However, it was ingenious, so they had just hired him for a lot. So the idea never was realized. Um, it was just put in a box, and he was put in a box beside it, and people could come visit him and he could talk about it, right? That is at least what my friend told me. And he was quite fascinated by this individual, because the individual was, how I remember the innovation, it was quite innovative, and that guy was quite clever. But because of this, it's not corruption, right? Because it's competent. Yeah, that's how it works. But because of this system that was put in place, um, it didn't allow him to move forward to something that might have been better, even, right? So when we say that easy is not always better, it's not because we don't want to do things that's better, but maybe because the better thing is difficult, in some cases. I wouldn't only say impossible, but maybe risky. And it's the risk that maybe is also fueling the fear of individuals, right? So and that's of course also something that is also quite big, right? So the patent thing, that China is stealing products and selling them in their own market, and that's why a lot of firms are not moving to China, because and not producing even in China, because um, they don't want to share their secrets with them, because they know that in 2 years it will be copied and produced, and they will earn no profit, which is not good. Uh, so now we're moving into a talk a little bit about trade, right? How how do people trade with? How do countries trade with one another? Well, you need trust, right? Especially with technological things, and maybe things that are more bigger. So ships, um, for instance. I've worked for Periscope, which is concentrated on the maritime and the marine industry, uh, and a lot of ships are produced in different places, or the parts of the ships are produced in different parts of the world, and they are then uh, combined in a maybe totally different place than where the different parts were produced. And here you really need trust, and that people are producing it to the exact same configurations. But of course, if you don't have that trust, you will never be able to build a ship. Or you might be able to build a ship, but it would never be as good as it otherwise could have been, right? You also need the trust in the sense that they will actually give you what you ask for, firstly, and secondly, that they will not overprice it, right? That you wouldn't have a case where uh, suddenly, because because they are the last link, right? They can then ask for an increase of the price of this product. Otherwise, they will not give it to you. and in that sense, you will be forced to pay it because you need that final last part to build the ship maybe, and that just wouldn't be nice, right? Or maybe even think that that you were building in Syria and then a civil war came. So it's also the risk of that you're running, right? So stable countries and stable regimes and uh, people that you can trust. That's quite important in making these innovative steps and not going to the easy route. So I think once we've done that, so that's a positive note to the world. Once we've created a more safe world, a more peaceful world, it will also lead to more successful innovations, I think. I think I actually have some time to read. I think I can read a page or two. I think I'm gonna keep it to one page. So, but let's see. Maybe it's an easy page. And I'm just yeah placing my book beside me, taking a sip of coffee, and opening the book. Yes, we're on page 176 and we are reading the chapter of the accumulation of capital or of productive and unproductive uh, labor. And if you recall, the discussion was about, I think, this farmland that had to produce enough produce um, to maintain both the farmer that worked on it but also the owner. So the part, and we're in the middle of the page approximately. That part of the annual product of the land and labor any country which replaces a capital never is immediately employed to maintain any but productive hands. It pays the wages of the productive labor only, uh, that which is immediately destined for constituting a revenue either as profit or as rent may maintain indifferently either productive or unproductive hands. Whatever part of his stock a man employs as a capital, he always expects it to be replaced to him with a profit. He employs it, therefore, in maintaining productive hands only, and after having served uh, in the function of the capital to him, it constitutes a revenue to him. Whenever he employs any part of it in maintaining unproductive hands of any kind, that part is from that moment withdrawn from his capital and placed in his stock, reserved for immediate consumption. Unproductive laborers and those who do not labor at all are all maintained by revenue, either first by the part of the annual produce which is originally uh, destined for constituting a revenue to some particular person, either as the rent of land or as the profits of stock, or secondly by the part which, though originally destined for replacing a capital and for maintaining productive laborers only, yet when it comes to their hands, whatever part of it um, is over and above their necessary subsistence may be employed in maintaining indifferently either productive or unproductive hands. Thus, not only the great landlord or the rich merchant, but even the common workman, if his wages are considerable, may maintain a menial servant, or he may sometimes go to play or a puppet show, and so contribute his share towards maintaining one set of unproductive laborers, or he may pay some taxes and thus help to maintain others set more honorable and useful indeed, but equally unproductive. That's quite interesting, right? Um, it's very interesting. I think the note here is that um, um, productive labor produce profit. So this profit is given to productive laborer, um, employer of capital, and unproductive laborer. No part of the annual produce, however, which had been originally destined to replace a capital, is ever directed towards maintaining unproductive hands, till after it had put into motion its full complement of productive labor, or all that it could put into motion in the way in which it was employed. The workman must have earned his wage by work done, before he can employ any part of them in his manner. That part too is generally but a small one. It is his part. It uh, hmm, it is It is his spare revenue only, of which productive laborers have seldom a great deal. They generally have some, however, and in the payment of taxes, the greatness of their number may compensate in some measure the smallness of their contribution. The rent of land, and I think this part relates to the idea that that it doesn't make sense to have working poor. Um, it really doesn't, um, and it doesn't. And I will tell you in a second. Uh, to have, and it doesn't because, as he says here, firstly, it has to maintain or to provide the bare subsistence or the necessary subsistence for the employed, for the productive hands. That means I produce something, I need to get enough in order to feed myself, house myself, and have enough maybe for my kids if I have any, right? The rest can then be taken by the person who've employed the capital into the business. It can be given to those who are unproductive laborers, so those that may be to the security forces or something in the parameter, if any are needed, right? And then lastly, right, he says unproductive labor or taxes. He says yes, taxes is a good way, but taxes are gathered to maintain those that are producing unproductive labor. Very, very, very much interesting here, right? So it's only worthwhile to have taxes and to tax individuals once they have produced enough product at their work to create their bare subsistence. If they are doing productive work. In today's world, that relates to the working poor in the US. I think, all have heard about the mother that has to work a day job and an afternoon job to provide food and housing for her children, which is something that is definitely not okay in accordance to this, especially if she's working in a job where she's actually productive. That means if she's working in a place where, and I'm gonna give an example here, uh, something like Amazon, for instance, uh, where she's actually producing something, right? She's producing the boxes, she's putting things in the boxes and then shipping it out. So, in reality, you cannot be giving money to research and development. Okay, yeah, let me take a step back and let me make it very clear here. You cannot ask this individual to work multiple jobs and not give this individual bare subsistence and simultaneously give a profit to the capital owner, i.e., the share owners. It cannot happen. Cannot happen that this and in this case it's a woman. This woman has to work a different job because this job is not giving her enough money. But then the what she's producing, right? So the profit of that is given to the share owner, to the capital owner. That means that there is an unbalanced, something that is not right, at least in accordance to Adam Smith, right? Let's continue. So workman must have earned his wages by work done before he can employ part of them in this manner, right? In this manner. That part too is generally but a small one. It is his spare revenue only, of which productive labor has seldom a great deal. They generally have some, however, and in the payment of taxes, the greatness of their number may compensate in some measure the smallness of their contribution. The rent of land and the profits of stock are everywhere, therefore, the principal sources from which unproductive hands derive their subsistence. These are the two sorts of revenue of which the owner have generally most to spare. They might both maintain indifferently either productive or unproductive hands. They seem, however, to have some predilection for the matter. The expense of great uh, lord feeds generally more ideal than industrial people. The rich merchant, though with his capital he maintain in industrious people only, yet by his expense, that is, by the employment of his revenue, he feeds commonly the very same sort uh, as the great lord. The proportion, therefore, between the productive and unproductive hands depends very much in every country upon the proportion between the part of the annual produce which, as soon as it comes either from the ground or from the hands of the productive laborer, is destined for replacing a capital, and that which is destined for constituting a revenue, either a rent or as profit. This proportion is very different in rich from what it is in poor countries. Okay, thus at present in the opulent countries of Europe, a very large, frequently the largest portion of the produce of land is destined for replacing the capital of the rich and independent farmers, the other for paying his profits and the rent of the landlord. But anciently, during the prevalence of the feudal government, a very small portion of the produce was sufficient to replace that capital employed in cultivation. In consisted it consisted commonly in a few wrecked cattle maintained altogether by the spontaneous produce of uncultivated land, and which might therefore be considered as a part of that spontaneous produce. It generally too belonged to the landlord, and was by him advanced to the occupiers of the land. All the rest of the produce uh, probably belonged to him too, either as rent for his land or as profit upon his paltry capital. The occupiers of land were generally bondmen, those persons uh, and and effect were equally his property. Those who were not bondmen were tenants at will, at will, and though paid, um, the rent which they paid was often nominally little more than a quit rent, it really amounted to the whole produce of the land. Their lord could at all times command their labor in peace and their service in war. Though they lived at a distance from his house, they were equally dependent upon him and his retainers who lived in it. But the whole produce of land undoubtedly belonged to him. Who can dispose of the labor and service of all those whom it maintained? In the present state of Europe, the share of the landlord seldom exceeds a third, sometimes not a fourth part of the whole produce of land. The rent of land, however, in all the improved part of the country has been tripled and quadrupled since those ancient times. And this third or fourth part of the annual produce is, it seems, 3 or 4 times greater than the whole the whole had been before. In the progress of improvement, rent, though it increases in proportion to the extent, diminishes in proportion to the produce of the land. In the opulent countries of Europe, great capitals are at present employed in trade and manufacturers. In the ancient state, the little trade that was stirred and the few homely and coarse manufactures that were carried on required but very small capitals. These, however, must have yielded very large profits. The rate of interest was nowhere less than 10%, and their profits must have been sufficient to afford his great interest. At present, the rate of interest in improved parts of Europe is nowhere higher than 6%, and in some of the most improved it is as low as 4, 3, or 2%, though the part of the revenue of inhabitants which is derived from the profit of stock is always much greater in rich than in poor countries. It is because the stock is much greater. In proportion to the stock, the profits are generally much less. I think this podcast is already very long, and while I wish to read much, much, much more, I cannot do it at least live in this podcast. I might read a little bit and then summarize it to you guys afterwards because I'm quite interested in reading. But let's at least go through what we've read today and see what that leaves us or where it leaves us. Right. So the last part was the idea that when you employ capital, right, the person who employs this capital wants this capital back. Understandable. and he also wants something upon it. He's employing this capital for productive labor, right? So cap- capital is employed for productive labor. That makes sense. And it's the and when the productive labor has been paid, right, in wages and so on and so forth, and you have created the bare subsistence of those individuals, then suddenly you can take something that's extra, right? That can go into the payment of the capital back. Now, as we read in old times and in poor countries, the profit on capital investment is not high. And that is in nominal terms, right? However, now it is much higher, and it's not because and in rich countries it's much higher, and that's not because that in old times they received a lower profit, right? A percentage of the profit, but because now they receive a smaller proportion. However, it's because the land in this case, right, with the farm example, the land is more productive and it can yield more good to all parties involved than it could previously. Which relates to the fact that maybe there has been some 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 innovations that have improved the land, but also it seems that it is more security, right? Because he compares old times with new times in the sense that old times had these war times where you could not maintain um, you could not uh, maintain the security of the land, and you had these fluctuations in the productivity of the land. It was spontaneous, as he says, because the cattle had to eat from all uncultivated land rather than from cultivated land, right? So less planning was involved in the thing. So what what I really take out from reading today is mostly the first thing, right? Or what I see as more significant is the first thing, that the produce of the productive laborer has to go to the subsistence of the productive laborer. And after that has been fulfilled, it can go to the subsistence of the unproductive laborer, or to pay back the capital that was involved in, 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 in allowing this productive laborer to have a job, um, and or or it can go to paying taxes, which also goes to unproductive uh, laborer, laborers, or labor in general, right? Where, as Adam Smith mentioned, uh, we really need those unproductive labor, because that could be the military, for instance, or the police, and those are some services that we do need, quite important. We really can't live without. Uh, I would argue. I think that's where I leave you today. And as usual, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. And again, thanks to my brother Mohab for being my guest today. It was quite informative to learn from him and to get his perspective on the corona crisis, and also into the health industry and how they think uh, about things, uh, and maybe also to contrast it with other nations that might, or you guys who might not live in Denmark, might live in the US or a different country, or maybe even the UK. You can contrast that with your country where you might need to pay for healthcare. So private versus public healthcare. You got the perspective of public healthcare. What's your perspective of on private healthcare? Um, and I will repeat his advice to everyone, which is to invest in your health and to learn more about your own bodies. And as always, I have my own motivation at the end, something that I will leave you with, and that relates to the productive labor, but maybe more to you as a person, and a more personal advice, right? Not large macroeconomics or even microeconomics. It relates to microeconomics, and this is an advice that I've heard somewhere else. I have to be honest for plagiaristic reasons, and it is that any exercise, anything that takes less than 2 minutes, don't wait and do it later. Do it now. If it's something pretty easy that only takes 2 minutes, maybe you can even for yourself raise it up at 5 if you don't have very much to do, maybe even half an hour, right? Depends on your personal life, but let's just keep it simple and say 2 minutes. Anything that takes 2 minutes or less, just do it, right? There's no reason to wait around and let those small activities accumulate such that it becomes difficult. Just make it simple for yourself, and do the thing that might seem tedious at this point, but accumulating these small tedious tasks will require a lot of time and might even have a negative impact on your mental health, right? That you always feel overcrowded and there's always a lot that you have to do. But if the tasks are very small, there's no need to accumulate them all together then feel busy. 2 minutes is not it's not a long time to invest in your personal health, and to maybe also improve your life, and to improve the day and just get feel uh, a sense of accomplishment. So something, and this is a different person. Something that I heard from Jordan Peterson is to make your bed. Just make your bed in the morning, and you will feel that you've accomplished something, right? Because if you can't even do that, well, you're definitely not going to be able to go through the exams and pass that, because that requires a lot more difficult work and a lot more consistency. Um, and making your bed takes, well, at least for me, less than a minute. So do small tasks to feel a sense of accomplishment, and those small tasks will at some point accumulate to become something big, or at least they will motivate you uh, to do something that's big.